TTN Radio. Hear the difference.
Examining the events that impact and shape China and the rest of the world. This is the Beijing Hour. 1 hour of news and information brought to you every weekday. Now here's your host.
Shane Bigham with you on this Thursday, October the 6th, 2023. You're listening to a special holiday edition of the Beijing Hour, coming to you live from the Chinese capital. On today's program, Japan's once again dumping nuclear contaminated wastewater into the Pacific Ocean. China's claimed its first ever men's marathon title at the Asian Games, taking the gold in Hangzhou. Smart appliances and other innovations are changing the way that people live and interact with their homes. In the second half of the program, we have more episodes of our Stories of Xi Jinping podcast series. And now checking the day's top stories. Japan started the second release of nuclear contaminated wastewater from the crippled Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant into the Pacific Ocean. The Tokyo Electric Power Company says it plans to carry out the release over 17 days to discharge 7,800 tons of the radioactive wastewater, roughly the same amount as the first discharge that ended on September 11th. On Wednesday, the South Korean government said it will send a team of experts to Japan to monitor the situation. Jack Barton has more.
This will be the third team of experts that South Korea has sent to Japan to monitor the water release, and also ahead of the water release, the first team arrived. They're from the National Institute of Nuclear Safety, and what we're told is they will be at the International Atomic Energy Agency monitoring site at Fukushima, and they will also be given access to the General TEPCO facilities to oversee at least the initial part of what is expected to be a 17-day second release. We don't know if they're going to be there for the entire release, and it's part of President Yoon Suk-yeol's balancing act, really. The South Korean government, which has been seeking better relations with Tokyo, has essentially signed off on the release, while knowing that a large part of the South Korean public remains opposed to it. The most recent polls we have from the Gallup poll shows that a little more than 70% of South Koreans continue to disapprove of the release, and that even amongst conservatives, the people that vote for President Yoon Suk-yeol, about 50% are also disapprove of the release. And the number one fear is really around seafood, and we've seen seafood sales really drop. I was speaking to the manager of a branch of a popular chain in Gangnam, and he was telling me that they've been running at a loss now for about 6 months, and they're really having serious discussions about whether to hold on to see if the situation improves or just close up the business. So, we've seen the big demonstrations die down, but the concerns that linger, and this really does remain a contentious issue despite the government's attempts to try and allay people's fears here.
That was Jack Barton reporting. Now the race is on to grab the gavel left behind by ousted U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. The biggest question on Capitol Hill is who will replace him. Some House Republicans are already throwing their names into the hat, but as Nathan King reports, it could be an uphill battle with much division and frustration.
Off the drama, what next? What we do know is that Kevin McCarthy, the man who only lasted 9 months in the speakership and was the first to be ousted as speaker from the floor, has essentially said he is not running again.
I believe I can continue to fight, maybe in a different manner. I will not run for speaker again. I'll have the conference pick somebody else.
So the question next is who will take his place? Well, there are going to be lots of names floating around, but first of all, focus on these two. We have Steve Scalise, the number 2 of McCarthy, the House Majority Leader, who has been calling Conservatives for a long time. He's a Republican from Louisiana. He is very much part of the MAGA crowd, although he does, at the moment, have cancer and going under treatment for that. Also look at Jim Jordan. If anyone you looked at the Benghazi hearings or the current impeachment inquiry, he is a flamethrower Republican congressman from Ohio, very much part of the MAGA crowd. The question is for both these and anyone else who gets in the races, can they command all of the votes essentially in the Republican caucus? Remember, they have a majority of about 4. They can only lose about 4 votes. So it's going to be very, very difficult. There may be other contenders coming along as well, but essentially, to use a metaphor, It's a bit like a doctor changing, but the patient not. And the patient has the same diseases, the same divisions in the Republican Party when it comes to cutting spending or aid for Ukraine. Same divisions when it comes to whether to support Donald Trump's MAGA wing of the party or being more moderate. A lot of Republicans have seats where Joe Biden won to become president. So it's very, very complicated indeed. And the trouble is, nothing can happen in the House of Representatives here until a speaker is appointed. Now, it'll take about a week for them to coalesce behind a candidate. There'll be a private vote amongst the Republicans. Then it will go to the whole floor. You should imagine the Democrats opposing whatever their choice and trying to nominate their own minority leader, Hakeem Jeffries. That's formulaic, but it's going to be very, very difficult.
That was Nathan King on the possible successors to ousted U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. A major healthcare strike is taking place in the United States. Over 75,000 workers have walked off the job in 5 states and Washington, D.C., demanding higher wages. And Caroline Malone has more.
A group of medical workers, pharmacists and optometrists, eye doctors, took part in a protest in Virginia as part of a much larger group protesting against Kaiser, against the health company, who they say have to give them higher wages and need to hire more staff in order to improve their conditions. The unions that are representing these workers say they've been part of negotiations for 6 months, and yet in that time they haven't seen the types of conditions that they need to see for their staff members.
We were there during COVID. Frontline healthcare workers were there for our patients, for our communities. We were touted as healthcare heroes. And now when we're at bargaining, all we are told is we're too expensive.
These workers say a lot of their colleagues have left since then, and they haven't seen an increase in wages. So that's why they decided to come out to the streets across different states of the United States and make sure that the companies start to appreciate them in the way that they feel like they should be.
That was Caroline Malone reporting. A survey from the New York Federal Reserve shows U.S. job seekers have the highest ever wage expectations when getting a new job. Karina Mitchell finds out what makes people feel comfortable when asking for more money as economic conditions remain restrictive.
Many U.S. workers are demanding a record amount of pay for the jobs they perform. The average employee now unwilling to accept anything less than about $78,000 annually for a new position, up from $72,000 a year ago. That's just one of the findings from a recent survey from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York.
We came out of COVID and had a period of the lowest unemployment, this most serious labor shortage the country had seen in many decades, and it caused people to get used to wages that kept going up week after week, month after month.
But the outplacement firm's senior vice president says the pendulum is now swinging back in favor of employers, particularly as unemployment rates creep higher and wage growth is slowing. He believes boom time for job seekers may be over, and the labor force needs to lower its expectations.
I think those expectations are now falling a little bit out of touch with reality.
But that's not necessarily true for everyone looking for work. Mona Lipson was laid off from her environmental, social, and governance job in March of 2020 and didn't find work again until November of 2021.
It was a great job, probably the best I've ever had, fabulous coworkers, bosses.
But that new job was short-lived.
It was a startup that had been doing really well, and unfortunately it felt like it kind of got caught up in that weird tech recession that we've been going through, and the company had a couple of layoffs, a couple of employee reductions, and I got cut in the third one, which was January 31st of this year.
Luckily for her, she quickly landed what she considers an even better job. She attributes it to a still robust labor market and recognizing her value, and also to the recently enacted wage transparency laws where she lives. I asked her how much more she earns now.
Almost double, a little bit less than double.
That's amazing, and congratulations for that. NYU economics professor Nicholas Economides is upbeat about workers' wages despite a slowing economy. He thinks that while compromise is necessary, job seekers do still have some momentum in the coming months.
I see some significantly higher compensation packages by workers, not as high as their expectations, but still significantly higher than we have seen since 2019.
That was a report on rising wage expectations in the United States.